website, you'll see a picture of me at a sit-in at the Senate office building, actually begging for improved Medicare for all. If we had that, we'd be a lot more like other nations, as was mentioned, other rich nations, where this doesn't happen to minorities, women, minorities. So I'd like to get to Congress and in fact fight for Medicare for all. Having worked for CMS, I know it can be done, and it can be done in just a year or two.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So to answer it with nuance, we shared a reproductive justice platform at janeforcongress.com back in October, which talks about federally protecting access to abortion care and gender-affirming therapy, making sure that we have expanded Medicare for all, making sure we have free menstrual products in every public restroom, because if toilet paper can be free, so should menstrual products, making sure that we have a minimum nurse-to-patient ratio so that we're actually providing better care within our hospital systems, making sure that we have comprehensive sex ed in all of our public schools, which teach about everything from abstinence to contraceptive care to gender identity to consent, making sure that we're lifting the earnings cap to expand and extend Social Security and solvency. Again, all these issues tie in together, and we need that nuanced approach if we're actually going to address that issue with sincerity and with sustainability.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you asked that question. It's really an incensing issue, and for me, as someone who's had 2 children since I've been in office, to go through all the procedures that they were talking about and hear that data, it was particularly incensing. And so that's why, when I was president of the Women's Caucus, we partnered with the Legislative Black Caucus to prioritize this issue and to show unity around this issue. And so this past year, I was very proud to be a co-sponsor and support, both in the committee on the House for the Maternal Health Act, which forces accountability and data. I think those are the initial steps, but certainly we need to be having this discussion within the broader context of racial disparities and inequities in our healthcare system.
So I currently serve as the lead for eliminating disparities in public health on the County Council in the most diverse jurisdiction. I come from a family of healthcare professionals. My background is in public health. And so we don't need data to tell us what we already know, that Black women are dying at a higher rate than any other demographic. We need to ensure that we're investing in maternal education, cultural competency for our healthcare workers, our nurses. We need to ensure that we're investing in doula programs to ensure that the people who are at the bedside taking care of people who are pregnant are able to get the prenatal care that they deserve, and also the postnatal care. I remember after giving birth and having to go back to the hospital because of the complications with giving birth. And we have to ensure that our medical professionals are informed and listen when people of color are experiencing pain or concerns. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to just echo the comments of many of my colleagues here. I was also proud to support the Maternal Health Act and agree that data should be the starting point, but we have to recognize the urgency of the situation that we're dealing with here. I mean, this is the wealthiest country in the world, and the inequities that we see in our healthcare system, specifically when it comes to maternal health, is morally outrageous. When you look specifically, I want to focus on 2 things. One is this as it relates to the immigrant communities, right? I'm glad that Maryland has now led the way in making sure that babies and new mothers can get access to health care, and I'm glad that we made progress now with the Access to Care Act to ensure that immigrant communities generally can access care through the state health exchange, because lack of access to that primary care is contributing to issues such as this. And then the last part is just when it comes to rural health care. I'm really excited that in Crescenttown in Allegheny County, the Women's Health Center was opened just this year, expanding access to reproductive health care, but really to all women's health services. That kind of work, we have to keep moving in that direction to address this issue.
Thank you all. We are going to stay on this topic for just a moment longer. And George, I would like you to lead the conversation when it comes to the concerns many Americans have around reproductive health care in particular, whether that is birth control, IVF, or of course, at this point, when it comes to being able to terminate a pregnancy or not following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Where do the candidates all together, where do you stand on the issues such of reproductive health care, and how would you bring that stance to Congress?
The House and the Senate clearly have to pass a law that makes it legal for women to do as they please, their bodies, their health. For that, wholeheartedly, being father of a daughter, 3 granddaughters, sister. So there's no doubt in my mind that were I to be a congressman representing you, I would urge for legislation to make it the law of the land, so no state could reverse that by their local laws.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question, and I think you just saw some of those differences to actually get this done. Not just giving you voters generic talking points or empty platitudes, but really specific, nuanced policy solutions. That's what my campaign is all about, actually talking about those specific solutions, as I just mentioned earlier, about reproductive justice. So you can actually hold those candidates accountable once they're actually in office. I also have been advocating for a 20-year term limit on Supreme Court justices. We need to depoliticize the courts, and we should not have these decisions affecting real lives be in the hands of people who have just political immunity and are just sitting in these offices forever. We need to reform the system itself and talk about healthcare in a comprehensive way. Reproductive justice, women's healthcare is a human rights issue as well, and it ties into everything else. Speaking about healthcare at large, I'm a cancer survivor. I worked at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I ran a healthcare program with then Vice President Joe Biden called the Cancer Moonshot. And I am currently program director at the National Kidney Foundation, a healthcare nonprofit. So utilizing my personal and professional experiences into this issue, I think, is very important as well.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, because I really feel like it gets to the heart of what the importance of the next election. So as Women's Caucus president, we took a position on choice for the first time in 40 years, and I want to give a shout out to the 2 Women's Caucus members who are here, Delegate Queen and Delegate Barista Marie Woodward. I hope that time isn't held against me there. But after the Dobbs decision, we saw the issue of choice go down to the states. And since that decision, 16 states as of last week have enacted some form of abortion ban. And so it's really important that the first step in the next Congress is to pass the Women's Reproductive Healthcare Protection Act, which codifies Roe v. Wade. And then after that, we go for access. You can have a right all day long, but if you have barriers to access, that right is cut down. And so we need to create ways to make sure that states can't intervene in accessing that right. Thank you.
We need to start by electing a woman to this seat. Out of 8 seats in Maryland, we have 0 women representing us. Out of the 2 seats in the Senate, 0 women representing us. I don't need a man to speak for me. We've allowed men to speak for us, and look at what has happened. This is a woman's issue. It's been a woman's issue since this was overturned, and we need to ensure that once we get to Congress, first order of business is codifying Roe v. Wade into law and ensuring that no justices and no one outside of a woman and her medical professional has an opportunity to decide what happens with her body. Anything that I have to make a decision with regards to my body and my reproductive health, I live with those decisions. Those are emotional decisions, they are tough decisions, they are expensive decisions, and they are consequential. This is what this election is about, consequential decisions. And if we don't elect the right people, we will continue to see our rights rolled back.
Well, I have made it very clear that my first action as a member of Congress will be to co-sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act to codify abortion rights once and for all at the federal level. In the state of Maryland, I co-sponsored the Right to Reproductive Freedom Act, which will now be on the ballot for voters to decide to codify reproductive freedom in the Maryland Constitution. That's a very big deal. I worked with Senator Sarah Elfreth on a bill that was inspired by conversations that I had in places like Crescenttown at the opening of the Women's Health Center about the threat facing abortion clinics, reproductive health centers, the violence that they're facing since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And we created a grant program that I hope now will be fully funded to provide grant funds for security hardening for these abortion clinics. Abortion is a human right. Access to abortion is a human right, and you should be able to access reproductive care without ever having to fear for your safety or a provider having to fear for their safety.
Thank you all.
Peter.
Oh, we did. I'm so sorry. I was so excited for the next question.
Sorry to disappoint you. Well, I agree with the passion of all of the candidates. Let me introduce a couple of thoughts, and some of them are disturbing. The first one shouldn't be. I'm the only lawyer in this race, practicing attorney, and I'm the only one who's litigated in federal courts throughout the United States for decades. I think I'm the only one who has actual experience in terms of what the courts might do. I am quite fearful, and I've got to think this through, and I've been thinking it through and talking to a lot of experts, and none of us think we are on solid ground when we think a national right to abortion. Because if we do that, the right wing are going to outlaw it nationally given the chance. Trump, God forbid there's a Trump presidency or somebody like him, the House and Senate fall to the Republicans someday, we will all be in trouble. Women will be dying again. I'm not old enough to remember that, but I know people who did. Women died in back alleys. They died in botched abortions. We can't let that happen. So we have to worry about, we're gonna make it once and for all right. Yeah, we may let them take it away from us, so let's be careful. The other concern I have is the Comstock Act, and we can talk about that later.
This is time. I see that we do have someone who would like a response down at the end, delegate.
I just have a question. Are you opposed to the Women's Health Protection Act?
I am definitely in favor of restoring Roe v. Wade. I have two little girls. I will fight for them. I am in favor of Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to defend her body and choose, because it's only her
But
choice.
specifically the Women's Health Protection Act, are you supportive? Would you co-sponsor it?
It appears that we are all in agreement about the Dobbs decision needing to be overturned to reinstate Roe v. Wade. So with that, I would like to move on. We are going to keep it on domestic policy for a moment, and here's why I'm excited, is because we're about to talk about DEI. So, America is growing increasingly diverse, particularly along racial lines, and we see that not just amongst those of us who are on stage, but even in our audience tonight. With that in mind, we are also seeing a lot of attacks, what some would classify as attacks, on this process of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and programs. As a member of Congress, what priorities would you be pursuing to address the concerns that many have that diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be rolled back completely? And yes, Mr. Young, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so first of all, we have to depoliticize this term. Diversity, equity, inclusion is not some boogeyman, it's not some horrible thing. It just simply says that these positions of power, that people should be learning about the community that they're trying to serve, and history should be taught equitably, and that when you have hiring practices, you again reflect your consumers, you reflect your constituencies. And I find it very hard to believe that only old white men are qualified for every single position. So it's just bringing in that diversity and inclusion and understanding. One of the positions I had in the Obama White House was in presidential personnel, where I was in charge of helping find and diversify the political appointees across the federal government. So what we ended up doing is helping find and retain qualified individuals who were not given an opportunity because they didn't have the quote-unquote perfect resume, but they brought in traditional other skill sets from their lived experiences. And so as a member of Congress, it's having that nuance, helping bring in hiring managers to understand that practice, and to do more to reach out to diverse communities, to engage them in a way that they have not been engaged before.
Thank you. So long before I ever thought about running for Congress or being in elected office myself at the state level, I was a congressional staffer. First I worked for Henry Cuellar of Laredo, Texas, and then I worked for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, so I've worked for 27 members of Congress in total. But when I was with the CHC, one of the things that we worked on quite a bit was DEI. And so I would want to continue the work and continue the leadership of the Hispanic Caucus and the Black Caucus and the work that they are currently doing with DEI. Something that we've been working on at the state level is board diversity. making sure that corporations, to Ashwani's point, have leadership that represents their consumers and their constituents. I think that's an immediate first step and certainly fertile ground.
So I'd like to replicate something that we're already practicing right here in Montgomery County. Racial equity and social justice. We ensure that before we pass any piece of legislation in Montgomery County, it is passed through a racial equity and social justice lens. It's evaluated to ensure it does not disproportionately impact a particular community of color. We should be able to do that at the federal level. There's no reason why we are not evaluating the legislation that is passed, given the demographics of our country and the direction that we are moving in, becoming more and more diverse. It's our tax dollars, the programs that we invest in need to be made through a racial equity lens. So that's legislation. We also need to ensure that we are hiring the people who are actually going to be experts in this field. We saw the controversy that's happening right here in the city of Baltimore, and I'm so proud that the Baltimore mayor has now returned this DEI as duly elected incumbent, because we have to take power and ownership of the words that people try to use as weapons against us and use it for our good and ensuring that legislation serves everyone.
I was about to bring up the duly elected incumbent thing because I think that is fantastic. But we have to call the attacks on DEI for what they are. It's racism, and it's abhorrent. And what we saw after the collapse of the bridge, where the mayor of Baltimore, who was leading the effort to try to save lives and try to recover and begin the process of rebuilding, was being attacked online and called the DEI mayor. It was racism, pure and simple. And we have to call it for what it is. We also have to put an end to these book bans. We see proposals to do just that in the legislature. I sit on the committee that fights back and says, no, we will not do that. My parents grew up in a repressive military dictatorship in Uruguay. I heard their stories of when the military came in and said, you can't read this, you can't read this. We have to stop the attacks on curriculum as well. We should be able to teach full history, the full history of this country. And the last thing I'll say, if these attacks on DEI programs that we're seeing at colleges and universities across the country, there need to be consequences for that. And if it's tied to federal funding, we have to make sure that we put an end to these attacks and leverage federal funding to do that.
So I've been following this issue, as you can imagine, for many years as an attorney, and we failed in the law and we failed in academia when we talk about diversity. We've let the right wing talk about diversity as the enemy or the opposite of quality, right? Oh, diversity is stopping more qualified people from doing fill in the blank, getting a job, getting into a college, university. That's just intellectually false. Business, on the other hand, at least a lot of the truly competitive businesses, understand that diversity is a part of excellence. It's not the opposite of excellence, it's a pathway to excellence. So we have to stop adopting right-wing conceptual frameworks, and I know that sounds a little academic, but we really can't let the right wing frame the debate as diversity versus quality, diversity versus excellence. It's the pathway to excellence, and anyone in business will tell you that. I also think that we have to stop letting the right wing focus on DEI, and therefore, to echo some of my colleagues here, forgetting racism does exist. Civil rights violations continue to happen. Voting rights violations continue to happen. Housing violations continue to happen. We can't see those issues.
So some of you saw that cap I wore earlier today, so let me quote it for those of you who haven't seen it yet. It's a slogan I came up with when I ran for this position in 2018. It says, "Make America good again," good in capital letters, this time for all of us spelled out in black, brown, yellow, red, and pride colors as well. Many people have asked me where they could buy one of those, and I haven't yet put it online to do. I have copyrighted it. So eventually it'll go out there. So I still run a little bit, and occasionally when I run in charity races, I wear a Black Lives t-shirt matters, and I get white people telling me, you know, all lives matter, and it goes through a reason why that's so, but not so. There's not enough time to go through that right now. But there's one thing I would like to say. There's room for just one more old white male in Congress.
So DEI, many of us believe, is just focused really on Black Americans, brown Americans, right? There's this perception. But we also know that it encompasses as well our LGBTQIA+ brothers and sisters. But the other individuals, the other group that gets left out of that conversation as well, is our immigrant communities. Many of you on this stage today detailed how you have a connection to an immigrant, whether that is your parent, it is yourself, it is your wife. With that in mind, what would you do to support immigrant communities in this district? And more broadly, U.S. immigration policies. Delia, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. I too have an immigrant connection. My grandparents are immigrants from the Philippines. That's where I get my last name Lopez from. And so I've been working on immigrant rights throughout most of my professional career. As I mentioned, I worked for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and I was there, and the last time there was a big push for comprehensive immigration reform. And as a state delegate, I've already worked to advocate for immigrants' rights by passing a bill last year that will allow people who do not have Social Security numbers or permanent status to obtain healthcare occupational licenses. That addresses our healthcare disparities and helps more immigrants get good quality paying jobs. The immediate things I would work to advocate for is a pathway to citizenship for the 11 to 12 million folks who are contributing to our economy, contributing to our communities, and need to have some type of legal status. I think there's also other sorts of protections in terms of providing opportunities and pathways to equitable employment.
Yeah, so I'm the daughter of Jamaican immigrants. I'm proud to be here with my grandmother. She hadn't seen me at a candidate forum before. My father, all immigrants who came to this country in search of the American dream. A lot of the immigrants that come to our shores are fleeing violence, and we need to ensure that we're holding those countries accountable, imposing sanctions on those countries who are forcing their residents to flee to our country. We also need to ensure pathways to citizenship. People who come to this country want an opportunity to work and take care of their families. We need to ensure that the backlog that's happening in our judicial system is taken care of. We're already hiring more judges and expanding the bench because the backlog is taking too long for those cases to get processed. We also need to accelerate how quickly we provide work permits so people can come and work. They want to work, they do not want to work under the table. And so there's lots of things that we can do to help people achieve the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this question. Look, I'd be the first immigrant elected to Congress from the state of Maryland in over 200 years. The last guy was from Ireland, so I'm not really sure how much that counts, but the first Latino ever elected and the first LGBTQ+ person ever elected in the history of our state, right? And that's not just about representation and making history, right? I see how much representation matters as a state legislator, and I know how much it matters as a member of Congress. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Bold Pact, the Latino Victory Fund as well, and I'm proud that our campaign a few months ago released what we call the Plan para el Futuro de Nuestra Comunidad, the plan for the future of our community, detailing specific policies that we would look to advance on everything from supporting minority-owned, Latino-owned businesses, fighting for the American Dream and Promise Act that's being sponsored by Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, who's one of the big supporters of our campaign. I have detailed plans as to what I would do to lift up our community, and I have a proven record of, I'm a member of the Latino Legislative Caucus in the legislature, and I'm really glad that we finally got the Access to Care Act passed this year to expand access to health care for undocumented communities in the state.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm an immigrant and my wife is an immigrant. And by the way, my little 4-year-old, when she heard President Trump talk about poison, so looked up to me and said, "I'm not poison." That's how deleterious and how poisonous the debate has come in this country. A little 4-year-old has to listen to the presumptive Republican nominee very quickly. I believe in the DREAM Act. I will fight to make that law. Economic growth and development, especially to communities that have been systemically deprived of those opportunities, is a central part of my campaign. Lorianne talked about countries from which people are fleeing. I think she's absolutely right. We have way too much conversation about people coming south to north. We never have conversations about guns and drug money going from our country south, destabilizing countries in Central America and in Latin America. We've got to stop that. And then finally, well, I think that is it, and I'm out of time. Okay, great.
So my parents were both survivors with a capital S. I was born in Prague in 1947. We came here in 48. And my parents, although they died both under Social Security, lived the American dream because they saw both their son and daughter enter the middle class. And we need to be able to do the same for all immigrants. We need more judges to make sure that those who seek asylum here get a fair shake at becoming green card holders and then eventually citizens. So the, let's see what else was I going to say about that. We'll go into the problems in the southern border later, I'm sure, I imagine, so there's not enough time to do that now.
Thank you. So I know your question touched on immigration reform, but then also LGBTQ individuals in that community as well. So back in October, we were the first campaign to even have an immigrant rights platform and an LGBTQ rights platform, which tackles both of those communities and issues in a comprehensive way. I talk about having refugee resettlement programs and more funding for those, having a pathway to citizenship, expediting work permits, ending the use of private prisons to house immigrants, so we actually treat them like real human beings, making sure we're ending local programs like 287G, which force local law enforcement to act like federal ICE agents and erodes community trust. We also have to reform ICE, and we have to understand that immigrant issues don't live in silos. So that's why our plans also talk about investing in more ESL, or English as a Second Language programs, within our public schools, making sure we're investing in more IDEA programs for those in the disability community, making sure that we mandate students to have African American study credits in order to graduate high school, making sure that students who are part of the LGBTQ community can play in the sports team that they identify with, making sure we're ending discrimination from that community in adoption care and foster care. All those are comprehensively tied in together, and that's what I would do if I was elected a member of Congress.
Thank you. We are going to continue this conversation on the international community by turning now to something I think that has been on top of all of our minds since October, which is the Israel-Hamas war that is continuing as of now, as we speak, more than 6 months at this point. And it is involved to one that is interconnected, not just in that region, but from nations around the entire globe. What should the US's role be in this evolving conflict? And I would love for you to take a moment to really think about young voters in this moment, many of whom, particularly young voters of color, have said that this is becoming a deciding factor for them when they are thinking about who they're going to cast their ballots for in November. And we will start with, I believe, Councilwoman, it's your turn.
Yeah, so this has been heartbreaking to witness. As a council member at large, representing the most diverse county in the jurisdiction, 40% of our community is Jewish. We know that Islamophobia, anti-Semitism has been on the rise, but with the escalations that we have seen with this war, we need to ensure that we start with bringing all of the hostages back home. Then we need to ensure that anyone who was killed in captivity is also brought back. We need to bring peace, prosperity, and investments to a war-torn area. We need to ensure that we are bridge builders. Before this attack happened, we were talking about a two-state solution, and we've gotten so far away from that. And that's the pathway that we need to go back towards.
What happened on October 7th was, there's just no words for it other than a tragedy, and you know, it horrifies me to hear the stories, and I had the opportunity to meet with a number of the families of the hostages. Some are still in captivity, some are presumed to be deceased at this point, and just to see the pain in the faces of those mothers who, this one young individual in particular, who was, they know from a video that his arm was shot off and then he was taken captive, and the parents have never heard from him again. But we have to, the tragedy that continues every single day, the pictures and videos that we see, I think makes clear that Netanyahu has to go. We have to, and as the United States, we have to continue mounting that pressure to ensure that there is a full surge of humanitarian assistance, and that the Israeli forces are prioritizing centering the protection of civilian life, and making that something that the United States continues to demand and push for.
As I mentioned, I was a former relief worker in a war zone. Nobody else running can say that. I've been worked in a famine. Nobody else can say that. I'm an expert in international law and humanitarian law. I'm on the board of a human rights organization. I don't take the suffering at all lightly. I've seen famines personally. I've seen victims of war, children personally. It's tragic what's going on in the region. I don't think there are simple answers. I think the Biden administration, and I know many of the leadership in the Biden administration, in the State Department, I've known some of these folks for years, are people of tremendous goodwill, tremendously talented, and I think they're doing a very difficult job. Currently, I don't call for removing any particular foreign leader, because that foreign leader wants the United States to make that an issue so he can get reelected. I think the United States has to be a neutral player with respect to that and push hard for humanitarian relief. I would simply say the ugly truth currently is that Hamas is refusing that. Hamas is refusing a ceasefire so that we can get aid in. The Biden administration desperately wants to do it and is trying to do that, and I respect them for that.
So again, if you go to the website, you'll see a picture of me shaking hands with a young Afghan at a demonstration against the Muslim registry that President Trump wanted to put into place. You won't see pictures of this, but maybe I'll put them on. Well, first of all, in 2018, there was a forum not unlike this one where I suggested a two-state solution back then. And I demonstrated against the Netanyahu government in Tel Aviv and here in DC. And so I still feel there's room for a two-state solution. But folks on the ground there in Israel and Palestine, there were many, many groups before October 17th trying to get together to make peace. Not the leadership of Israel, not the leadership of Gaza. Clearly, it's in their best interest to not do that. So we need to do, as was suggested, we need to let Israel get rid of their leader, and hopefully somehow Hamas, the other players in the Middle East, the other Muslim players in the Middle East, will take care of the rest.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you hear some of my fellow candidates say we must protect and defend human rights, but some of them have become pro-war candidates that have turned a blind eye to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. To be clear, I've been the only candidate in this race since November to publicly on my website call for a ceasefire, a two-state solution, and conditioning all military aid on upholding humanitarian rights based on the laws we already have in the books. Not only is that the only way to get hostages released, the only way to get aid to civilians, but I believe in the right and nuanced approach, which not only supports our ally Israel's right to defend itself against terrorists, but also calls out Netanyahu's apartheid regime of ethnic cleansing with no regard to civilian lives. We have to demand better. We have to uphold the laws that we already have in place. We have to condition aid, and that is the only way that we can actually start to fix this humanitarian crisis that has unfolded and continuing to unfold today.
Thank you. Well, this is a complicated question to answer in a minute, but I'll give it my best. I come from a military family. Everyone but one sibling and one grandmother are veterans, and so I come from a family that understands and feels the cost of war. And I am not a particularly hawkish person. But I understand that this is a regional issue that's actually far greater than just Israel and Gaza. It has to deal with Iran, Saudi Arabia. In a short sentence or two, I think the United States' role in a short-term sense needs to be ensuring humanitarian aid is funded and resourced and is actually delivered to the people that are needing it. And then in a long-term sense, we need to be using our credibility and our leadership to push for a two-state solution. I don't think a two-state solution is possible unless there's a lasting peace, and there's really no lasting peace if the hostages are not returned and Hamas is still in a position of leadership. And with that, I have time.
Thank you all. I really appreciate your responses to that question. But zooming out a little bit more, we are also seeing conflict in, of course, Ukraine and Russia, and also in Haiti. What priorities would you pursue in those arenas? And again, I know it's a big question to ask, only 1 minute response time, but as a member of Congress, how would you like to address particularly those issues? Delegate, I believe we are at you now.
Yes, thank you. Well, on this issue, right, our allies are watching and our adversaries are watching. And I'm really glad that the House of Representatives took a step forward yesterday in advancing the aid package. But if you're one of our adversaries, whether it be China or North Korea or Russia, you are looking at the failure of the United States government from a foreign policy standpoint, from a congressional standpoint, of advancing any sort of aid. It took months, right, to stand with our allies in any sort of serious way. That's a real problem. Because if you're someone that's looking at Taiwan, if you're China looking at Taiwan, if you're North Korea promoting regional aggression, if you're Iran, whoever it is, they're looking at our failure to lead at this moment in time, and it's giving them the green light. And if you think about our allies that are countries around the world that are thinking of who to ally with, they look at our inability to function right now, right? And they'll look at Russia, they'll look at China and say, why don't we turn in that direction, knowing that our failure to move forward, our failure to stand with our allies jeopardizes their security and the stability of the entire world, right? So we have to stand with our allies. We have to have a Congress that functions and signals to our adversaries that we're willing to stand up against them, and to our allies that we're willing to stand up for them.
So one of the things you can do as a member of Congress, which nobody ever talks about, is congressional delegations that can go meet with other parliamentarians in Germany and other parts of Europe to reinforce American foreign policy. I would like to think, given my foreign policy experience, that I would be asked from day one to be part of such delegations to meet with people in Europe with respect to Ukraine. Same thing with my time in Asia. With respect to the Middle East, again, I'm the only person who's lived, worked, and traveled in that part of the region, and I do so regularly. I've been to Muslim countries many, many times, worked there, and still do. And also, today I'm calling upon all my fellow colleagues, candidates, to endorse my idea, which I'm about to release, for a War Powers Act resolution empowering President Biden to do all that he deems necessary to protect U.S. forces, U.S. bases, U.S. ships, and U.S. national interests in the Middle East. Iran has already shown that it will attack a sovereign country, Israel. We haven't talked about that yet. And I'd like to get all of my candidates on the record, fellow candidates, will you endorse a War Powers resolution giving the Biden administration authority to do so?
I have to think about that for at least 30 seconds. So, having done a little study about this, we're in a tough situation in Ukraine. But last year, when the war restarted, Ukraine tried to take land back that they had lost to the Russians, and were unsuccessful at that. They do, however, seem to be Ukrainian, and they also, as a result, lost lots of young men, not only to death and being wounded, but also leaving the country. So they seem to be much better at defense. So I think we should give them all the defensive help they can get, not obviously with our troops, but with material and funds. Although that funds, we get in a situation where funds, it seems like whenever we go and back a war and we send funds over there, we lose a lot of it. And you know, they end up in the pockets, probably in the pockets of leadership in those countries. So we're going to be careful about that, but I think we can help them defend themselves. We'll have to talk about Haiti another time.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. So my approach to foreign relations, foreign diplomacy is to have consistency. So yes, defending our allies, yes, protecting human rights, and to do that, you need to condition any sort of military aid to any country on upholding those humanitarian rights as set by the UN, as set by the International Court of Justice, as set by our own current US laws like Leahy's laws and like regulations from the Department of State, Justice, and Defense. We are not consistent as a United States government in doing so, and that's why we have some inconsistencies with our approach to Netanyahu's apartheid regime and then Putin's regime as well. We have to be consistent, supporting our allies, but at the end of the day, protecting innocent civilians, which I think we're doing a horrible job of doing.
Thank you. So in regards to Ukraine, Haiti, North Korea, China, Taiwan, there's a lot going on in the world, and a functional Congress will be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, but functional is the key word there. And I think you only have a functional Congress if you elect people who are up to the challenge, and part of that means getting bipartisan support for things, not just the easy things, but the challenging things. And I'd like to offer every single one of my bills that I've passed as a lawmaker has passed with bipartisan support. But on the issue of foreign policy, you know, the biggest threat to America's foreign policy is a Trump presidency, because we will not be credible, we will not be esteemed or have any influence internationally if we elect Donald Trump to be our next president. And so it's not just a foreign policy issue, it's really a political issue that we have to surmount.
First and foremost, we have to stand with our allies. We should not have Ukraine fighting without the proper resources that all of our allies are providing. Of course, we are spending billions of dollars, but we cannot afford to allow foreign entities think they can go into a country and wage war. We have to stop them by any means necessary. And so, yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's going to take long. Yes, there are casualties in war. Yes, we have to provide humanitarian aid. Yes, we are losing lives with every penny that we delay from being funded to ensure that our allies are protected. From Ukraine to Haiti, we need to ensure that places like Russia do not feel justified in the work that they are taking on. We have to stand with our allies and we have to ensure they're protected. Thank you.
Thank you. And Peter, I believe you had a rebuttal?
Yeah, I won't have to disagree with my friend Ashwani here. To equate the Putin regime with Israel, which is a democracy, a functioning democracy, the only one in the region which has opposition politics and a free press, is, I think, way off the mark, Ashwani. Second, the idea that it's all about Israel without recognizing that Hamas as a tactic continues to use human beings, including children, as human shields, and I hope you would support bolstering the Human Shields Act, which targets people who do that, which is a war crime in and of itself. We never talk about that, and I never hear people talk about that, but that's also outrageous.
At risk of striking back and forth, we'll allow you to respond.
I mean, you don't need a law degree to know a war crime when you see it. It's pretty clear that Netanyahu is committing war crimes. Even at least half of the Israeli people agree with that. Instead of having, just bombing hospitals, refugee camps, shooting people who are trying to get food and aid, you should have special targeted operations. Instead of calling for the exile of all Palestinians to Egypt or the Congo, actually talk about a two-state solution. This is not, you don't need a complicated degree to understand that. There is a war crime happening, and we need to stand up and have bold solutions to fight for that.
Thank you. We're going to bring the conversation back to our shores for a moment and talk about our economy, and specifically the disparities that we are continuing to see despite signs of economic progress under the Biden administration. Racial and ethnic disparities persist, including in the labor market. So with this in mind, What are the things that you would pursue in Congress to increase economic security for communities of color? Peter, we will begin with you.
Okay, well, this has been a major focus of my campaign, economic growth and development in the 6th District. Here are some quick ideas. First, I'm going to try to live up to some very big shoes. David Trone has brought an enormous amount of money into the district. He's on the Appropriations Committee. He's the 10th, I think, or among the top 10 in Congress for bringing our fair share of federal dollars into the 6th District, and I salute him for that. I will work very hard to do that. How many of you have heard of community development finance institutions? Anybody? That's great. I'm the only one talking about these to bring to all communities that have been traditionally underserved. There is 0 in the 6th District. There are 15 in Maryland, 0 in the 6th District. I want every single county in the 6th District to have one. Concessionary loans, financial services to people who traditionally don't have those, and low-income housing and bootstrap startups. So, you gotta be joking. Go to peterformaryland.com. You'll see more.
We stick to that 1 minute time, y'all.
No, you're getting there, Peter, sorry.
Okay, so one of the problems is, well, for 30 years I was a registered Democrat. Then NAFTA was passed, and I realized that the Democratic leadership was heading in the wrong direction. So I left the Democratic Party for 2 decades, and I've come back three years ago. The reason I left was because of NAFTA, and here in Maryland we lost 70,000 jobs because of NAFTA and other laws like that. So we need to undo that, bring whatever we can back to the shores, and especially here in the 6th District. Also, this is just one idea, many we can look into, but my wife and I grab our salads off a hydroponic tower we have in our kitchen virtually every night. And farmers are beginning to realize that there's less than 10% of the water needed to raise crops that way. And we now have large areas where farmers indoors have done the same, and we can do this north and west of here.
Thank you for that question. So the short answer is we have to reduce the cost of living for all of our community members. Now, how do you do that with nuance? So at janeforcongress.com, I outline specifically issues like making public college free, canceling student debt, having Medicare for all, which will not only save our economy more than $600 billion a year, but eliminate premiums, deductibles, and copays for all of us while allowing us to get better care. And I also talk about an actual living wage. So I've been pushing for a $26 minimum wage by 2030, which not only brings every worker's salary up to the national average salary of $55,000 a year, but more importantly, it is what businesses should have been paying workers had wages kept up with inflation. By doing so, we're actually going to make sure we're reducing poverty, reducing crime, increasing consumer spending, expanding our tax base, and making sure that people don't have to work 2 or 3 or 4 jobs just to stay broke. We have to lift people out of poverty, and it goes back to those nuanced, actual policy solutions, not just generic talking points or empty platitudes.
Thank you. Again, tough question to answer in a minute, but I'll give you the lightning round here. So our healthcare system needs to be reformed. We have a healthcare system where only insurance companies and big pharma are getting rich, and people of color specifically are being saddled with medical debt. And so I introduced a bill this year that tackles that. I'm very proud of. Another thing we need to reform is our educational system in terms of higher ed specifically. We're told from early childhood that getting a degree is the pathway to a middle class. I know I was told that. I'm the only one of my siblings to go to college, but that's not true if you're a person of color. That student loan debt is crippling for a significant portion of your life. We also have a problem with housing being affordable. That's something that we feel the pinch in this area, but it's also a national issue as well. And the other thing that needs to be a big part of this conversation is affordable childcare. We cannot have folks returning to work if there's no child care spots, and we can't have a child care system that is largely dependent on the labor of women of color who are not getting rich in those positions. And so lots of work to be done. Looking forward to talking more about it.
We need to start with equal pay for equal work. There's no reason why in the 21st century, women are still making 40 cents on the dollar. Women of color are making even less And as you continue to go down the demographics, the disparities widen. We also need to ensure that we are investing in innovative legislation. We're passing a bill about baby bonds, ensuring that anyone born in this community will have access to investments that are from the government, and they will follow them throughout their lifetime. When they graduate, they have money for college, they have money to buy a home, start a business. We also need to ensure that we're investing in our main streets all across the 6th District who have been underinvested and left behind in our economy. We need to ensure we're passing rent stabilization for people who are housing insecure, pathways to home ownership, ensuring that our seniors can age in place, ensuring that there are pathways to home ownership that can be helped by the federal level.
First, I agree with many of the things that have been said today, from expanding access to childcare to expanding access to housing, lowering the cost of healthcare. I just want to focus in on one area here, which is unions, right? We know that when union participation, when union membership goes up, wage inequality goes down, right? And I'm proud to be supported by the teachers union and the transportation union and the flight attendants union and the Teamsters, among some others, that have seen my commitment to fighting for worker rights and fighting for unions in the legislature. Sponsored a bill to ban captive audience meetings, mandatory captive audience meetings in the state of Maryland. Would strongly co-sponsor and support the PRO Act in Congress, so that we have adequate protections for union and unionizations across this country. And will be a proud and strong supporter of unionization and workers across this country, because we know that unions ensure higher wages, better benefits, and better workplace protections, and I'll be a champion and work with them in Congress.
I want to stick on the economy very quickly, because I do see that we've got some young faces in the audience, I'm sure tuning in to the live stream as well. We know that student loan debt is one of the driving factors for young folks like myself not being able to contribute perhaps as much as we would like to the economy. We know President Biden has tried and in some ways passed student loan forgiveness. So just very quickly, if we could do just a very quick discussion on the importance of student loan forgiveness, particularly when we look to communities of color. As you know, many, I'm sure, Black women hold the most student loan debt in our nation. How important is having student loan debt affecting our ability to contribute to the economy?
Well, clearly, as you said, whatever payments you're making to your debt, which probably is more interest than actually taking the debt down, is not going anywhere but to banks. We already have plenty of money. When I was teaching a class in Montgomery calculus, on the wall there was a little note about how much student debt there is. I think it's close to $2 trillion now, and I told the students, and this again goes back to making America good again, which it was for me. I paid $50, not per credit, not per class, but per semester at Brooklyn College. There were some other small fees, but $50 a semester, that's $100 a year. It's $400, and with a small state scholarship, I actually got a free education, and a really great one, Brooklyn College. So there's no reason why we can't get back to that. Forgiving as much debt as possible, all of it, if we're up to me, and then making sure that people going to public universities and college had the kind of debt I had, which was none.
I've been saying this in my opening remarks, and I said it several times here, making public college free, canceling student debt is something that we need to do, because I view education as a public good. In the same way that taxpayers pay for K through 12 education, we need to make sure that if people choose higher education, they're able to do so without being penalized. It helps the economy, it helps businesses find a more skilled workforce, and it helps move more people out of poverty as well. Beyond that, I also want to make sure that as a member of Congress, I'm helping bring more federal funds to this district and fighting for more investments for HBCUs and for other institutions and organizations that support our communities of color and our BIPOC communities. All of that is needed and important, and that goes back to the kind of experience that is needed in Congress. What's needed in Congress is someone who knows and has the experience of building coalitions at the federal level and knows how to fight for that increase in federal funding. And that's where my expansive experience working in the federal government, 2 different offices in President Obama's White House and 2 federal agencies can really come into play.
I'm so glad that you asked the student loan question because it's something that has kept me up at night for many years, not only as someone who represents the only Hispanic serving institute in our state as a lawmaker, but also as the only one of my siblings to go to college. I put myself through all of my degrees. I worked about 1 million jobs. I was a domestic worker for several years, and when you are scrubbing pots and pans and toilets, that gives you lots of time to think about things, particularly student loan debt. And so as a lawmaker, every year I've introduced student loan debt bills. At the federal level, I think the low-hanging fruit is making the public service loan forgiveness program as viable and solvent as possible. It's a very important thing in Maryland. We have so many people here working for the government and public servants. The average Marylander, just a fun stat for you, owes $40,000 in student loan debt. So think about what an economic impact that would have if we had forgiveness, which I support. And if politically that's too tough to handle, then at the very least we need to forgive interest. It costs the federal government more money to process the interest on student loans than the interest themselves. Thank you.
I wish inflation actually kept up with wages as much as it's kept up with college tuition. As someone who is suffering with these increasingly expensive student loan payments, I was an Elizabeth Warren delegate because I wanted to ensure that student loans were forgiven. We need to ensure that regardless of your background, where you live, you can graduate college and career ready. You need to graduate from our public schools and be ready to enter the workforce. My daughter graduated because she was enrolled in the dual enrollment program with Montgomery College. We need to invest in our community colleges. I attended a community college. Our governor, Wes Moore, is a graduate of community college, and we have the Harvard on the pike. So please enjoy our community colleges, and we also need to ensure that we are treating our colleges the same way we treated our banks and bail them out.
I hate this question because you just remind me that I have to pay off my student debt. So, and like the average Marylander, I think I owe about $40,000. So, look, this is personal, right? And I support the administration, the Biden administration's plan, and would support legislation if necessary to get this passed through Congress, depending on what the courts do. I think we have to stop charging federal interest on these student debt payments. It is absurd. The federal government is making money off of students who wanted to get a higher education. Look, the bottom line here is let's recognize what the problem is, which is the skyrocketing cost of higher education. My parents grew up in a country where college was free, right? And that's part of the reason that we're here right now, because of that opportunity. Their parents, my grandparents, never had the chance to make it out of middle school or high school, right? So we need free 2-year community college. That should be our start. I think we can do it. I think we can afford it. It's cheaper than folks actually think. And let's address the problem proactively by addressing the challenge, which is the skyrocketing cost of higher education.
So actually I had over $100,000 in student debt, so I understand this issue. First, let me quickly associate myself with comments about unions. My father was a member of 2 unions. I strongly support unions. I'm a small businessman. I think unions are the backbone of our wage force, or can be. I also support community colleges. We have a great system in Maryland. We can only improve it, and we should improve it, including by further funding. I also support apprenticeship, something we don't talk about enough, especially for people of color who don't want to or can't afford to go to college, at least currently. But let me talk about student forgiveness. To the extent that the Biden administration is able to do it, it is trying to thread the needle and find limited approaches, and I support that. But longer term, it's not sustainable. We have to have a very aggressive conversation in this country about lowering the cost of education. We are seeing some colleges this year going up to $100,000 a year. That's insane. We can't have building programs where they build huge sports facilities and other things, or they hire armies of administrators. We have to have a tough conversation with colleges and universities about driving down the cost of education. I'm willing to do that.
Continuing to speak to something that I think is particularly important to young voters in this upcoming election is climate change. So Democrats in the previous Congress passed legislation that represented historic national climate action in America, which included the largest investment to encourage a clean energy transition. But what else or what more must be done to fight climate change?
Great. So back in October at janeforcongress.com, we actually had a comprehensive climate change agenda, and I was just recently awarded a Green New Deal champion because we talk about everything from electrifying all new cars, trucks, and buses by the year 2035. I also talk about having a rooftop solar power mandate for all commercial buildings, also by 2035, investing in more renewable agricultural practices to provide subsidies to our farmers to preserve the agricultural laws, but also making sure that if they're able to cover, plant cover crops and invest in more research and development, we're able to subsidize that. Making sure we're also having more electric charging vehicles and stations throughout our district, especially in the rural communities. Making sure we're preventing the drilling of any fossil fuels on any public land. I think that's important. Making sure as well that we have more smart growth and mixed use development. So not just focus on single family housing, but multifamily housing, especially in our district where there's areas of transit. Making sure as well that we're not taking developer money as campaigns so that we're actually able to enforce a lot of these sustainable solutions as well.
Thank you. So I think I'm the only person in this pool of candidates who voted for the Climate Change Solutions Act, which we passed, which is the most aggressive state investment in renewable energy. And so I'm very proud of that, and I would want to continue on as the next member of Congress for this area by expanding Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which is the one that you mentioned, being such a huge investment in renewables as well. So that's the first and foremost. Other things that we need to be doing are working with our partners in the private sector to reduce the supply chain, right? We all see those Amazon trucks. We know what their environmental impact is. We need to be investing in smarter growth, making sure that our infrastructure and transit and transportation needs fit the future that we're trying to build, and also electrifying our federal fleet of vehicles. But one thing that isn't talked about enough is how we show up as an international partner. Because the United States can only do so much on climate change. We need to be making sure that China and India, who are the two biggest polluters globally, are held accountable, and we show up as partners to them as necessary as well.
Yeah, so I am so proud to have testified to ensure the passage of the Climate Solutions Now Act, which passed at the state level. Here in Montgomery County, we have the strictest environmental protection standards. We have our climate action plan that has exceeded the building energy performance standards to ensure that any new building is LEED certified. We need to focus more on investing in infill development. We need to transition out of the incinerator that is here in the 6th District. Water quality and air quality are also priority areas that we need to ensure we're investing in infrastructure that is updated, especially in the 6th District. We know that transportation is the highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and so investing in more charging stations, transitioning our fleets to electrification will be priorities that I will advance in Congress. Thank you.
So climate change poses an existential threat. We know that from my perspective, right? We know that climate experts say by 2050, we're gonna face the most catastrophic consequences of the climate crisis. By 2050, I'll still be younger than the average member of Congress, right? So this is personal. And in the legislature, I've taken this approach that we do not have to choose between economic growth and climate action. We should and can do both. Right? And we know that climate innovation is going to play a role here. We are going to have to develop new technologies and lead on research and development. I think Maryland should be at the forefront of that. I'm really glad that one of the bills that I've been working on for a couple of years now with Senator Brian Feldman to create a founders fund investing $7 million in early stage climate startups, helping invest in an accelerator, the Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator, investing in capital grants for these startups, investing in a program that'll take $2 million in a program that'll take research ideas that academics are leading leading on, and turn those research ideas into companies, profitable companies, making Maryland a leader in climate innovation and research and development.
So I want to associate myself with my colleagues' views on green economy, and I think we all agree. Let me talk about some things that nobody else is talking about in this campaign. First, it's not just a US issue, obviously. We have to talk about South emissions as well. One of the obscure programs in the Obama administration was something called Power Africa, which helped, as many of you know, it's the most populous, youngest generation on the planet, and if Africa grows the same way that Asia did in terms of traditional power sources, this planet will be an ashtray. It's crucial that we try to develop climate-friendly technology, and we're doing that throughout the world, and I support the Biden administration for doing that. Another thing that I've been thinking about is, everyone knows about Kyoto, but actually it's not been as effective as something called the Montreal Protocol, which had to do not with climate change, but with HFCs, greenhouse gases. Believe it or not, that has been more effective in terms of stopping global warming than Kyoto has, because it has mechanisms for measurement and for enforcement. The last thing I would observe is, I tried to get investment at Loop, Maryland, but because of pollution, I couldn't get foreign investment. Environmental standards are pro-business, and we need to know that.
So those of us who are parents know that the best way to have our children do what we would like them to do is not by telling them, but by showing them. So as soon as we could, and again, this may have to do with the privilege I have, but as soon as we could, we got 2 big panels on our roof to heat our water. We've driven Priuses since 2005. And right now, if you see me leave, it'll be with an electric car. And even though we have a Prius, if one of us is using a car, only one of us, we've been using the electric car rather than the Prius, so we don't burn any gas at all. If some of you have some of the material I've given out, you'll see that it's on used paper. So the idea is, not only do we have to use renewable resources for getting around and cooking and whatever else, but also to use less and bury less in our landfills. So again, by example, we've done that, and hope to continue to, and I hope to be around in 2050 to continue doing it.
The candidates, thank you so much for answering these questions. We've talked a lot tonight about a host of different topics. So as we go into our closing remarks, I'm going to ask that you answer one last question, and that is, as we look toward this general election, this is going to be a tight race, and it will be a race that could potentially will decide which party is in charge of the House of Representatives. So with this in mind, as you speak your closing statements, why should voters be confident that you'll win not just this primary, but the general election? We will start. And yes, we are giving extra time, I promise you. We'll have 2 minutes for our closing statements. And we will start at our other end.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you for the fantastic questions this evening. Look, I believe that to win in November, we need a candidate who's building the kind of infrastructure now, not just to win in May, but to win this November. And I want to quickly just address an elephant in the room, right? And I don't like talking about other candidates, but the perceived frontrunner in this race, the person who's raised the most money, last week wrote themselves a check for $550,000 to fund their campaign. Today they were in Ireland. They weren't here. They weren't here to take your questions. They weren't willing to show up at the only forum hosted by clubs of color in this campaign. That to me is absurd. And it's hurtful, right? Because this is an opportunity to answer questions that frankly we haven't had the chance to answer anywhere else on the campaign trail. So I'm personally, as a voter who lives in this district, very disappointed about that. Our campaign is building a grassroots movement across this district. This weekend alone, we've knocked over 1,000 doors from Garrett County to Gaithersburg. And we've showed up everywhere, and we've seen the energy and momentum on the ground, whether it be in Oakland and Garrett County, where 70 people showed up and packed someone's house supporting our campaign. We've seen it with the support from the educators and unions and so many organizations, the Sierra Club, that are backing our campaign and mobilizing and energizing their members. We saw it in an email that I got the other day that I thought was just the funniest thing from a voter in Newmarket in Frederick County, whose yard sign, I hope you all take a yard sign on the way out, whose yard sign had been stolen. And they said, you know what, I want a 4 foot by 8 foot one in my front yard to show my neighbors who I'm standing with in this election. I want voters in November to have a candidate that they're excited about, someone that they're energized about, someone that they're gonna go and get excited about voting for and tell their friends and neighbors and colleagues to do the same. It is time that this district has someone who lives here, represent it. It is time for this district to have someone who is not a multimillionaire, who doesn't care about us, represent this district. And I hope to earn your support on May 14th, and I promise you, we will win this race in November together.
Two years ago, I launched a historic campaign to represent this county. And now, 2 years later, I'm running to represent 5 counties across the 6th District because this is my home. This race is too important to sit this one out. And when I realized that we have a general election that has people across the aisle who don't believe in the democratic values that we uphold, I could not sit this race out. I know that we need someone who is trusted, tested, and experienced in running tough campaigns and having tough conversations, being recognized and passing bipartisan legislation across the country. And I am proud of that distinction. I'm proud of the reputation that I've built in this community and across the 5 counties to ensure our government works for us. I've worked at the municipal level, and now I'm working with jurisdiction all across the state of Maryland to ensure we are making a difference. We need smarter policies, smarter policy solutions, policy makers, and people who are ready to hit the ground running on day one. My record stands on its own, and I will ensure that we don't just win in May, but we continue to win in November, and we hit the ground running in January when we are inaugurated. We need to ensure a woman's voice is at the table, and we need to let Marylanders know that we have an opportunity to transform this state and continue the progress that we have continued making in this district. I want to keep this district blue, and I will do it with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I think only maybe a third or a quarter of people here are asleep. So I think we're doing a good job in finishing up our remarks here. But again, my name is Delegate Leslie Lopez, and I wholeheartedly agree with the question. This is a very complicated seat and a very complicated time in our history. And we need someone who has a track record as a lawmaker who will do a great job when they get there, and hopefully I made that case to you today. We haven't had a lot of time to talk about constituent services, but that's also incredibly important in this geographically large and politically diverse district. But we also need someone who could keep this seat blue, because it's not just about the western portion of Maryland, it's about the dynamic in the whole chamber. That's what the stakes are. And so I feel very confident about the ability to keep this seat blue, because for all of my life, I've been in a conservative family, a military family, a Catholic family. I feel like I have been preparing for this race every Christmas and Thanksgiving of my life, being a Democrat, learning how to talk to independents and conservatives, so I'm ready to go. I also feel like I could easily win this race because the 2 frontrunners on the Republican side, Neil Parrott and Dan Cox, I've already won against them. Just on Friday, I had a debate with Neil Parrott. Somewhere he's recovering. I wish him well. And then Dan Cox, I was on a committee with him for 4 years. And I think every bill that I stood up on the floor, he had something to say about. So for 4 years, I just cleaned the floor with him, and I'm ready to do it again. Don't judge me for my hobbies, but I'm ready to go. I'm ready to keep this seat blue, and I hope I can have your support in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here and for this opportunity. Once again, my name is Ashwani Jain, and after spending 90% of my time, 7 days a week, personally meeting voters at their homes, I've learned that voters across this district They're still undecided, they don't care about fundraising numbers, they don't care about endorsements, and they still don't trust politicians of either party or for any position. So what's gonna win this race, the primary in general, and what this district needs, is someone who has the most relevant experience, who has a winning operation, and can earn that trust back. When it comes to experience, I have the most expansive federal experience of any one of the great candidates in this race. That includes 2 offices in President Obama's White House and 2 different federal agencies. When it comes to the operation, let's be clear. Raising the most money does not necessarily make you the best candidate. It simply means you're great at sucking up to people to get their money. What matters more is how you spend that money. And on our campaign, by spending less than $90,000, we have shared the most policy nuance details at janeforcongress.com. We have signed up more than 293 active volunteers from this district. We have canvassed more than 64,000 individual voters across this district. We were the second in this race to have ads on TV, and including having social media ads and yard signs. And we've already earned the support of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans who can't even vote for me, but they're volunteering for us because of that nuanced policy solution, because I refuse to take outside money or money from any corporations or any PACs. And we were even recognized by the Washington Post as one of the top candidates with the most name recognition and resources. So in doing so, we have proven that we can win this primary and win the general without raising and wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars to do so. And finally, when it comes to earning that trust back, you need candidates who are going to give you bold positions and nuanced policy solutions. And we've done that on this campaign, where every one of my policies was not only released back in October, the first day I launched the campaign, but it was written not by consultants or outsiders, but was written by residents from this district who were impacted by those decisions. You can go to janeforcongress.com to learn more. Thank you so much.
Okay, so over the last year, the bad news is Democrats, the number of Democrats registered in the state has gone down. The good news is the number of Republicans has also gone down. On the other hand, the number of unaffiliates other than registrants other than Democrat or Republicans has gone up tremendously. So right now in Congressional District 6, like the last time I checked, with 224,000 Democrats, 187,000 Republicans, and something on the order of 150,000 who are neither. As I told you before, I was a Democrat for 30 years, and I was neither for 20. I believe that will allow me to speak to the neithers who are out there. In fact, I know that's true because over the years when I've run, and people have seen my button, bought for Congress. They've stopped me and we've talked, and many of them, as was suggested, are Republicans. My first treasurer for the first 4 times I ran is a Republican-leaning libertarian. So I think I can get those votes probably better than anyone here. Also, let's see. So so I was called a perpetual by Maryland Matters. I was called a perpetual candidate. So I want to read for you something that comes from the Frederick News Post from an article 10/10/2016. It was entitled "U.S. House Race: Gluck Paints Himself as a True Democrat for the 6th District." Remember, I wasn't a Democrat then. One of the paragraphs said, this is me, a quote of mine, "I'm going to keep running as long as I can," Gluck said. "Eventually millennials will understand why they're having problems and vote for folks like me." And then I said, it may not be me, but I can help to see that somebody like me wins. But I hope it will be me, in fact.
So this really is a job application. We're all here on a job interview, and those are the 2 questions. Who's the most electable, and also, who will be the most effective in Congress? One of the reasons why I got into this race is, and I was completely objective, I promise you, I thought I could be that. And here's why I came to that conclusion. First, I'm a successful business person. This seat has gone to a business person for the last 12 years. And in addition to starting my own business from nothing, from scratch, an old computer and an even older printer on dining room table, we now represent clients not only across the United States, but all over the world. But in addition to that, I've helped US startups grow their businesses. I've helped US investors overseas. I've even helped foreign countries with their economic growth. I can do the same in the 6th District, and I have a multi-point plan, the only one that I'm aware of who's running, to how new ideas to how we can do that in the 6th District. I've been a lawyer for decades. I've litigated tough cases all over the United States. If you go to my website, you'll see some of my cases that have been reported in the New York Times, the Washington Post, even foreign press. I've been a legal scholar and a law professor. If the US Supreme Court tries to gut worker rights, environmental rights further, and they may this term, I know how to fight them. Same with a woman's right to choose. I know how to fight the right wing. I've been a policy leader in our party for decades. I was the executive director of the 2004 Democratic Platform, which is the key document for setting forth for the entire party, both domestically and internationally, what our policy should be. And I'm not afraid of taking on a party leadership when I disagree. And also I'm an expert on foreign policy and international law. I've traveled and worked in dozens of countries. I've published articles in the Washington Post, New York Times. I've even negotiated with ministers and a head of state. But I need your help because I want to serve you. Please go to peterformaryland.com, and together we can bring integrity, hard work, and results to Congress. Thanks very much.
Thank you to our candidates for taking time to answer these questions. I want to say thank you to our audience, both here and at home, for taking time to listen to your candidates. And I definitely want to say a huge thank you to the Clubs of Color of Montgomery for having me here to host this tonight.
Don't run away, Cheyenne. Thank you, Mrs. Delaware. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's give another round of applause. I want to echo you in thanking our candidates for a really engaging and incisive debate on a whole bunch of topics. Sorry for the 1 minute, but again, good practice for the House floor, I promise you. Staff who had to write those morning 1 minutes, you'll appreciate it. Thank you, seriously, for being with us tonight. We know, again, how close we are to Election Day. You know from experience in running how important it is to be out there talking to voters, and so the fact that you all thought it important enough to spend 2 hours tonight talking to members of the community matters. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Just a couple more thank yous to our partners, both the other clubs of color, so for the African American Democratic, for the Association of Black Democrats, I'm about to use our old name, the Association of Black Democrats, the Latino Democratic Club, the Coalition of Asian Pacific American Democrats, and the Montgomery County Democratic Party. Pleased to bring you this conversation tonight. I want to shout out a couple of our elected officials who are here in the room. I saw some of our delegates. I know Delegate Bernice American North is here. I saw Louis Barr, who's Delegate Pam Queen is here. Louis Barr, who's the Chief of Staff for Delegate Greg Wims, is here. I think I see any of our other delegates. A host of other folks here, by colleagues on the Central Committee. Just wave your hands again. These are the folks who are the volunteers our Democratic Party forward. Look, you know, we're really close to the primary, and obviously, you see we've got an embarrassment of riches here in our district. Choose your candidate and work hard for them. Whoever you choose, vote, right? The most important thing is that we get out there and vote, that we get out there. I really appreciate, by the way, you all showing up on a Sunday afternoon where you could be home, get ready for the week, do what you need to do to engage in this discussion. We know that as engaged as we have been in this room, we represent tens of thousands of folks who are in the community who aren't in the room, and so we want to make sure that you get out there, spread the word to them. I cannot hear what you're saying. Just say it. I was getting there, but thank you. So my colleagues on the Central Committee it's so important that they wanted to interrupt me to remind you, because we are, that it is. I'm not joking. I'm just messing with them. But no, it is. It's critically important. I'm just messing with you. I was getting there at the end. Most importantly, show up and vote, but also that we need you to show up and volunteer, both for the primary, for early voting. We've got spots. If you have not been yet wrangled by a candidate to be at early voting or on election day, the party needs you to show up to help us to help us fill some volunteer slots so that we can spread the message to Democrats in the county about why you need to be showing up. But also, really important what we're going to be doing on May 14th on the primary day, but equally important is May 15th and 16th and 17th on to November. We talked about the critical election we have here in our district. We know about the critical election we have in our state with the Senate race. So we need everybody engaged, everybody on the front lines to bring this home and to make sure our district is served by folks who you've heard who speak to the values that we all share. Did I miss anything else? I'm just messing. Listen, I really appreciate it. I am really fired up and ready to go. I'm super excited hearing from these folks, and I know that there's a lot more work for all of us to do. So on your way out, make sure if you didn't check on your way in with our other clubs and caucuses here that are here in partnership with us, the District 15 Democratic Club, the District 39 Democratic Club, the Up County Democrats, and for folks who are like, what district do I live in? Well, make sure you know. We had some of those conversations earlier today. But thank you all so very much. If you need any other further information on what the party is doing, where you can go, how to sign up, you can visit us at mcdcc.org. Thank you very much. Be safe. Have a great night.